Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. I'm really glad that you could join me today. We're continuing our study of big names in the Bible, and today we come to our last lesson on Samuel. In this lesson, we'll see that Samuel is an older man, and he's got one last important thing to do before he fades from the scene. As this part of his story opens, Samuel is grieving. He is very, very sad. And the reason is simple. Saul, the man Samuel anointed to be Israel's first king, has turned out to be a huge disappointment. Saul had all kinds of potential and could have done so much for the people, but he never quite could live out his full potential. He could never really claim who God said he was to be as king of Israel's king of the nation of Israel. And so Samuel was very, very sad at this turn of events that Saul had failed, and as a result, Samuel was sad for Saul and sad for the people. It's at this point that God showed up and spoke to Samuel and said, "Stop your grieving. I have already moved on from Saul. In fact, I already have someone in mind for you to anoint as Israel's next king, and I want you to go and accomplish that task." And so the Lord sent Samuel to the house of Jesse in Bethlehem. Samuel met with Jesse and said, "I would like to meet all of your sons." And so one by one, each of those sons came and met with Samuel. Now when the first son walked in, Samuel thought to himself, wow, this must surely be God's choice. He's tall, he's handsome, he looks strong. But as soon as he came to that conclusion, he heard God once again say to him, "No, this is not the one." And he said, "I want you to know something, Samuel. I am not interested in what a person looks like on the outside. I am most interested in what a person is on the inside." Well, Samuel heard that. And as he continued to meet the rest of Jesse's sons, each time he was open to how God would lead him. And each time God said, "This is not the one. This is not the one. This is not the one." And finally, when Samuel had met all of the oldest of Jesse's sons, Samuel said, "Jesse, do you have any more children? Do you have any more sons?" And Jesse said, "Yes, we have the youngest, and he's out tending to the sheep." And so Samuel said, "Call him, have him come here. I will not leave until I meet him." So Jesse did exactly that. Called David to come home, and as soon as David walked in the door, God whispered in Samuel's ear, "This is the one. This is the one." Now David, by contrast to his other brothers, was very young, but he was handsome. But God looked at David and saw something in his heart that he thought would lead David to be an excellent king for the nation of Israel. And indeed, as we explore David's life, we'll find that David was the most important king in all of Israel's history. So after Samuel anoints David, he fades from the scene. In fact, the only other time we run into his name is just the simple notice that he died. Now, there are several really important lessons that I think we can learn from Samuel's life. The first is that it's never too late and we're never too early to start being obedient to God. You may recall in our first lesson that Samuel heard God speak when he was a young boy, and as he heard God speak, he learned how to listen for God and he learned how to be obedient to God. What he learned early in life was something that he carried to the end of his days. What that tells me is that it's very important for you, being young, to start listening for God and being obedient to God and doing what God asks. If we build this into our lives early, we will do well the rest of our lives. We will continue to grow in our ability to hear what God is saying and to hear what God wants out of our lives. This is a lifelong habit, and the sooner we get started, the better off we'll be. The second thing is this: Samuel, even though he was old, was willing to learn. As you recall from what I just said a moment ago, when Samuel met the first of Jesse's sons, he immediately thought, hey, this guy looks like he's got the goods. He looks like he should be the king of Israel. But God said, no, I measure things differently. So Samuel had to learn that God's perspective was different from his own, that there were different things in play. And so I'm impressed with the fact that even though Samuel was old, he was still willing to learn, still willing to grow in his understanding of how God worked and what God was up to. And so that tells me that in terms of your being faithful and my being faithful, well, there's always something more to learn. There's always something more for us to discover about how God works and what God is up to in this world. And if we start doing that early on, well, we will continue to grow and grow and grow. And therefore, even when we're old, we're open to how God might teach us and to how God might surprise us. So the important thing is to keep learning, to keep our eyes and our ears and our hearts open to however God would teach us and instruct us. And the final lesson that Samuel learned that day was that God measures people differently. God is not interested in how short or tall you are. He's not interested in how smart you are. He's not interested necessarily in whether you have a lot of money or you come from a good family. God is not interested in those outside things. Instead, God is most interested in what's on the inside. Remember, God spoke to Samuel and said, I want you to know that I don't choose people based on their appearance. I choose people based on what's inside their hearts. And so that's a lesson we all should learn, that God shows up with unlikely people in unlikely spots, the places that we would say, hey, God can't work there, or the people we would say, God can't do anything with them. Well, we might be open to being surprised because God does not look at things the way that we do. God looks at what's on the inside. And so what that suggests to me is that for all of our lives, one of the things that we work on, one of the things that we do is trying to build our character, trying to become faithful people, trying to become people whose words and actions match up with what's inside of them. That's the most important thing that we can do, is to have those things match up, remembering that God is not so interested in our appearance, but God is interested in what's in our hearts. Well, that will do it for today. And let me remind you that we are having Vacation Bible School July 26th through the 28th. You can sign up and register by calling the church office. We'll be happy to get you signed up for that event. You can see the schedule in our church newsletter, The Bond, and each week's e-news will give you all the information that you need for this wonderful and exciting event that's coming up. Well, the next time we meet, we'll begin talking about David, the man whom Samuel anointed to be Israel's next king. And there are lots of things that we can learn from David. So until next time, I wish you well and pray God's very best blessings on you and your family. Take care. Bye-bye.